My name is James Harris. At the time of the events described herein, I was 52 years of age. I was married to a woman I loved, had 2 grown children whom we had raised properly, and held a well-paying job that I enjoyed. I was gainfully employed in a position that I found enjoyable. My life was, by all accounts, enviable until it became less so. The sequence of events that led to this change commenced on a Tuesday night. I was required to work late, but not so late that my wife expressed concern. She returned home after the rush hour traffic had cleared. This was our usual Tuesday evening. We had agreed that I would purchase Chinese food on my way home, which I did. I parked in the garage, pressed the remote to lower the door, gathered my briefcase and groceries, and proceeded inside. I was a self-sufficient individual, returning to the comfort of my home to nourish my basic needs. I immediately observed that my wife's vehicle was not situated in its customary location. However, I presumed that she had departed on an impromptu errand and would return shortly, so I left the food on the kitchen table with the intention of maintaining its temperature and aware that if she remained at the office late, I would reheat it in the microwave. I proceeded to the front door, turned at the stairs, and proceeded to our bedroom to change into more comfortable attire. It was my usual routine to return home, relax, and eat. 10 minutes later, I descended the stairs and called out, "Marie, are you home?" I was taken aback by the lack of response. I was uncertain as to her whereabouts. Perhaps she had left a note. I was not particularly concerned, but I was curious. I proceeded to the living room and discovered a note on the coffee table. It was not the note I had anticipated, but one I had not considered. It read, "Dear Jim, I'm sorry to do this to you. But there's someone who needs me. I received a call today. It was one of those calls that one must respond to when it comes. I am sorry for leaving without warning. I know this will be difficult for you, but please know that I love you more than life and will be back as soon as I can. I cherish the life they had created together. I hope to resume when circumstances permit. Do not concern yourself with my well-being, I will be fine. Your loving wife, Marie." On the coffee table, next to the letter, was her cell phone. I was taken aback and perplexed, pondering the contents of her enigmatic letter. Did she say someone needed the individual in question was of such importance that their identity was not revealed? This prompted feelings of distress and concern. The urgency of the situation was such that the reason for secrecy could not be disclosed. The individual's whereabouts were unknown, and there was no indication of when they might contact him. This was not the kind of situation that should have arisen. It is noteworthy that a wife typically does not leave her husband without some indication of her intentions. The abrupt departure in this case, occurring at night, was particularly perplexing. It evoked a complex emotional response, oscillating between fear and anger. The lack of clarity surrounding her reasons and plans for the future, coupled with the absence of any communication, was a source of profound frustration. First, I considered how it was possible for her to forget her cell phone. Then, I reflected on why she would leave her cell phone behind. Upon reading her note again, I realized that it conveyed no new information. It simply reiterated her assertion that someone needed her. I received a call later that day. It was one of those calls that one must respond to when it comes in. One might inquire as to the rationale behind her decision. Was she attempting to convey that she is a secret agent, a super spy, or a neurosurgeon for the leaders of the free world? The question of her whereabouts remains unanswered. In that moment, my anger was a mask for my fears. I was concerned about my wife's safety and believed she would require my assistance. I was compelled to seek her out, yet I was uncertain of her whereabouts. I was eager to hear her voice and ascertain her well-being, yet I lacked the means to contact her. I remained seated, repeatedly perusing her note while the dinner I had prepared cooled and the sun descended. As night fell, I finally resolved to commence calling. I contacted her sister, our mutual friends, and eventually I reached her. Our children were also affected by the situation. I was unable to provide them with any information, which only served to exacerbate their distress. I attempted to reassure them that everything was going to be okay, but I was not particularly adept at doing so. Consequently, I disconnected the phone, promising to keep them informed. This only served to compound my own feelings of anger, as I felt that she was responsible for frightening our children. Despite my involvement in the error, I reviewed the note once more. I value the life we have built together and hope to resume it when possible. These are not the words of someone who will be home in a few hours or days. I was genuinely frightened, despite my attempts to reassure myself otherwise. I was concerned that my initial reaction was excessive. I contacted the hospital, but she was not there. I then contacted the police, but they informed me that I could not file a missing person report for at least 48 hours unless I was reporting a missing child. I considered providing false information, but I was uncertain how I could report a missing person who was 5 feet 3 inches with brown hair. She had hair that could have passed for 38, even though she was 49. I thanked them and terminated the call. I finally attempted to consume nourishment, but I was not hungry, so I merely stored the food I had purchased in the refrigerator and sat in the darkened living room, hoping she would return. She did not return, and I proceeded up the stairs a little after 2. Upon waking the following morning, I discovered that she had departed, leaving the bedchamber in a state of chill solitude. As I stretched my limbs, a sense of déjà vu washed over me, prompting me to ponder the optimal course of action. I contacted my place of employment to inform them of my unavailability, a decision that seemed to elicit a degree of concern. Before long, my phone began to ring with calls from colleagues. The workers inquired about my well-being, requested information regarding my needs, and asked what they should do about the files. In truth, assisting them was a cathartic experience that temporarily diverted my attention from my concerns. I contacted her office, but they informed me that she had called in and taken the day off. It appeared that they were not attempting to conceal this information. I received no further communication from her, although I initially believed that she was attempting to contact me. However, as time passed, I became increasingly convinced that she was as much in the dark as I was. I visited her office on several occasions, hoping for a frank discussion in person, but she was unable to provide any additional information. She departed on Tuesday, but I was not informed of this until later. She was missing until late Tuesday night, and the police needed 48 hours to commence their investigation. Consequently, I proceeded to the police station on Friday morning to file a missing persons report. I presented them with her note, and they inquired as to whether she had engaged in similar behavior previously. They advised me that verbally abusing police officers is not an advisable course of action. However, at that juncture, I was not in an optimal emotional state. They informed me that they would be forced to charge me if I did not compose myself. I was instructed to wait until a suspect was identified. Afterwards, I was asked to complete a form. The officer informed me that, in similar cases, the wife typically leaves with her boyfriend. I was told that I would likely receive divorce papers within the next few days. I was so distressed that I considered physically assaulting the officer. Instead, I expressed my frustration and left the premises. In stark contrast to the motto "protect and keep out," I returned home and collapsed into my chair, overwhelmed by stress with no clear course of action. I resumed contacting friends and family, but this time exercised restraint and did not call the children. Instead, they contacted me, and I was forced to inform them that I still had no information, but I was confident that my mother was safe and well. She is intelligent, capable, and I am certain that she is in control of the situation. In other words, I was providing false information to my children. It is a father's responsibility to be truthful with his children. However, I had no positive or negative information to share with them regarding their mother's whereabouts. How can a father have such a conversation with children who are deeply concerned about their mother's safety? On Tuesday night, my calls to friends and family triggered a flood of calls from them. On Wednesday, the inquiries were relatively subdued, with individuals expressing a desire to ascertain the latest developments. However, by Thursday, the calls had become increasingly urgent, with a growing number of people expressing concern about the situation. By Friday, the tone of some calls had taken on an unmistakable note of aggression. While the conversations remained primarily focused on the situation, the shift in tone indicated a transition from concern to accusation. It was an overwhelming experience. I was inundated with visitors, friends and family stopping by to inquire about my well-being. While they initially offered words of encouragement, they soon proceeded to ask probing questions. The inquiries often centered around potential issues between Marie and me, including whether we were engaged in a dispute or if she was experiencing distress. Her mother even inquired directly if I had any knowledge of Marie's whereabouts. In response to these relentless inquiries, I became visibly agitated and verbally lashed out at my mother. This was the first occasion on which Margaret had questioned me since we had known each other. "What are you talking about, Margaret? Are you accusing me of something? Do you really think I would lie about something like that?" Before I repressed my anger and heard and spoke in a calm voice, I said, "You think I don't know that?" By then, she was visibly shaking. Her husband said, "Jim, we know you're doing the best you can. Could you tell us what you know and maybe we can work something out?" I nodded and we sat in silence. Then I told them everything I knew, or rather, everything I knew about the matter. I then proceeded to show them the note, which prompted a state of puzzlement and concern. The Noto family's expressions indicated a combination of these two emotions. We spent an hour in a state of emotional distress, attempting to identify a potential explanation for Marie's abrupt disappearance. However, we were unable to come up with any plausible hypotheses. Henry and Margaret remained at the residence until lunchtime, during which time I prepared a light meal for the three of us. The three of us, our friends, appeared to be preoccupied with other matters. A constant flow of individuals arrived at the front door, some bearing foodstuffs, others beer. They sought information regarding the incident and my knowledge thereof. At a certain point, I ceased narrating the account. At this juncture, Margaret and Henry interceded, to their credit. The blame was shifted from me, and she commended me for my role as a concerned husband. I am aware that everyone harbored suspicions, but the sentiment persisted that I had the support of others. I was simply overwhelmed, as one might be in such circumstances. One by one, individuals approached me to express their support and concern. I urged everyone to contact the police if they had any information that might be helpful. However, I was secretly convinced that someone knew something that they were not disclosing. I hoped that the authorities would eventually receive this information, even if I never learned of it directly. As far as I could ascertain, no one had any knowledge of the situation. Apart from a few individuals who contacted the police to inquire about any potential leads, nothing occurred for several weeks. That is, nothing occurred for precisely 2 weeks. During this period, the police had my wife's vehicle license, along with the model and year of manufacture. I requested that the police add my wife's vehicle to their watch list for potential car thefts. When I made this request, I indicated that I hoped the vehicle would be recovered so that my wife could be located. The officers with whom I spoke appeared to be considering the possibility that my wife had fled the scene and was no longer in the area. It was evident that she would not wish to return home, even if she were located. I attempted to resume my work duties, but I was unable to perform them effectively. Consequently, I was advised to return home, where I found myself equally inept. Initially, I made telephone calls and then proceeded to search for her vehicle, even driving past the residences of her acquaintances. I considered the possibility that they were concealing her whereabouts. However, I was unable to discern a rationale for my persistent, daily concerns, frantic calls, and agitated behavior, despite my efforts to contact the authorities. In a state of distress, I sought counsel from my legal counsel, who referred me to a private investigator. The police officially acknowledged my right to do so. It was evident from their demeanor that they were not pleased with my inquiry. I was informed that private investigators often interfere with official investigations. Consequently, I inquired about the current status of the investigation. They revealed that they had no new leads. I then informed them, in a manner that could be described as cordial, that I did not believe there was anything new to report. It was evident that a private investigator would not interfere with the investigation, which yielded unsatisfactory results. However, there was no recourse to object to this decision. The investigation conducted by the private investigator was costly and yielded no new information. The police investigation had already identified the same lack of evidence. 2 weeks after Marie's disappearance, I continued to monitor the situation by making phone calls, driving around, and watching the news. Additionally, I began examining Marie's social media activity, credit card transactions, and our bank accounts. There were no unusual transactions on the credit card, but 2 weeks later, withdrawals were made from an ATM in a town 200 miles away. I promptly contacted the police and informed them of the situation. This prompted a swift response, with 2 detectives arriving at my residence within half an hour. The subsequent investigation reignited my suspicions. Finally, I confronted them directly, employing a calm and collected demeanor. However, in retrospect, this was only a minor step. I informed them that I was not the individual in question and that I did not utilize the vehicle in question. I was, in fact, in the city the entire time, contacting acquaintances, searching for the vehicle in question, and engaging in a multitude of other activities. It is evident that you have a promising lead, and it is therefore imperative that you pursue it with haste. It was apparent that they held negative sentiments towards me. The officers were uncooperative and indifferent. However, after approximately 30 minutes of assurances and veiled accusations, they departed, albeit with the commendable action of contacting the local police and providing information about the search for Marie and her vehicle. 2 days later, Marie's car was discovered in a hospital parking lot. Subsequently, the local police contacted me and advised me to refrain from any further action and to allow them to take control of the situation. I informed them that I would not be doing so and proceeded to drive away. Approximately 3 hours later, I arrived at the parking lot and located her vehicle within 2 minutes. However, the time seemed to pass more slowly, taking approximately 2 hours. Additionally, I observed 2 individuals in suits in a vehicle engaged in a heated exchange. I proceeded to park my vehicle and walk over to the officers, who appeared to be awaiting my arrival. I presented them with my driver's license and requested to see their badges. They exchanged glances and, despite being in a disgruntled state, complied with my request. I then assumed a kneeling position and inquired about their knowledge of the situation. However, they were only aware of the fact that I was informed that the vehicle in question had been under observation since the officers' arrival on the scene. When I expressed my intention to inquire about my wife, the officers informed me that they had already done so. I thanked them for their assistance and stated that I would proceed with my investigation regardless. My anxiety levels were rapidly increasing. I was not inclined to make friends with the hospital receptionist, who was unaware of my wife's name and the details of the vehicle parked outside. I therefore opted to join the stakeout. I had nothing to hide and everything to gain, so I requested permission to sit in the back seat of their car. It was likely the first time I had surprised a police officer since the incident began, but they agreed, and I joined them for the next hour. We conversed, and I briefly informed them of the limited information I had. When their shift ended, I was permitted to continue monitoring the vehicle. However, he did stipulate one thing: if anyone were to approach the vehicle, whether exiting the hospital or arriving by vehicle, they were to refrain from any interference. Instead, they were to notify the authorities and inform them that the vehicle was in motion. They were to avoid any attempts to follow the vehicle and were to refrain from any other action, but to simply notify the authorities. I nodded in understanding. It is important to note that there is a possibility that it is imperative that you do not attempt to locate your wife. There is a possibility that the individuals in question purchased the vehicle from another party and are thus unaware of its whereabouts. However, they may be able to assist us in identifying the original seller. It is of the utmost importance that you refrain from any action that could impede our investigation. Do you understand? For the first time since the inception of this endeavor, I found myself in complete agreement. I returned to my vehicle and spent the next 3 hours observing Marie's car. The only interruption to my vigil was a brief, urgent visit to the restroom, which I completed in a manner that would have made a speed-walking Olympic competitor envious. An hour later, I saw a woman walking toward the car. My heart stopped and I tried to catch my breath. It was Marie. She opened the car door and pulled out something small, then closed it and headed back to the hospital. I followed her, maintaining a safe distance. I was aware that if she were to become aware of my presence, it would be impossible for me to ascertain the truth. When we entered the hospital, I was approximately 20 meters behind her. I observed her enter the elevator, and, upon its arrival at the 3rd floor, I looked into the room and saw her sitting by the man appeared to be asleep or unconscious, and she was holding his hand. I coughed, and when she turned around and saw me standing in the doorway, my wife, whom I love and respect, fainted. I was angry and confused but called for a nurse, who attended to her until she regained consciousness. During this period of observation, I noted that the man in the bed was not a known acquaintance. He was neither a friend nor a relative, but rather an unidentified individual. However, it became evident that to Marie, he held a significance that surpassed that of her marital bond, her familial ties, and even my own presence. As I resolved this uncertainty, a new question emerged. While the nurse assisted Marie in rising from the floor, I seized the opportunity to contact the local law enforcement authorities. I informed them of my wife's discovery and requested their assistance. They advised us to remain at the scene and assured us of their imminent arrival. I provided them with the room number, and as the situation unfolded, I sensed that the situation was becoming increasingly intriguing. As I observed the man in the bed, I experienced a sudden chill in my heart, where fear had previously resided. Marie was visibly distressed and only shook her head in response to my calm and detached inquiries. I asked her to clarify several questions, including why Marie had left, why she had not informed us of her whereabouts, and who the man in the bed was. I inquired about her whereabouts and why she had not informed us of her well-being. I also sought to understand the circumstances surrounding the incident. On several occasions, she appeared to be on the verge of answering, but then lowered her head and began to sob once more. I remained in the room, awaiting her response, while the detectives conducted their investigation. I allowed them to take the lead, but was prepared to intervene if necessary. I placed my hand on my forehead and stepped aside, but the detectives immediately requested that I exit the room. One of them approached me and inquired about a dozen questions. I informed him that I had observed Marie approach the vehicle, followed her, and then confronted her in the ward. I later realized that confronted may not have been the most appropriate term. For the next 5 minutes, I reassured him that I had not harmed her. However, when he learned that the nurse had discovered Marie lying on the floor, the intensity of the questioning increased. Throughout this time, his partner had been conversing with Marie. I believe I managed to persuade them that I had not harmed my wife, or perhaps she had done so. I am unsure of the exact sequence of events that transpired. The officers requested that I leave the premises, so I contacted Marie via the intercom. I informed her that if I were to leave, I would be divorcing her. This prompted a hysterical reaction from her, and she implored me not to leave. I then met the detective's gaze and stated that I would not leave until I received satisfactory answers. Eventually, I was permitted to return to the room. I was permitted to return to the room in a composed and measured manner. I proceeded to inquire of Marie the questions that had been occupying my thoughts. Marie provided only oblique and incomplete responses. He is her high school sweetheart, the first person she loved, and he is dying, and he has no one there. There were extensive passages of information left between. I was permitted to inquire or hypothesize as to how one might reside in the premises for a fortnight without utilizing the provided charge card. The subject remained silent for an extended period before finally divulging the information. I resided at the aforementioned location, thus I am aware of the whereabouts of the individual in question. I possess the requisite key. The subject nodded silently and inquired as to the duration of my tenure. She gave a shrug and looked at the floor. I was aware that as soon as I made the accusation, there would be severe consequences if I was incorrect. Nevertheless, 2 weeks is an excessive amount of time for a man to wait in the dark for answers. How long ago, Marie? She did not respond. How long has it been? She did not respond to the question or deny the accusation. In such circumstances, the mind tends to become silent. At a later point in time, there will be an opportunity to pose new questions and experience new pain. For the time being, however, I believe that you should at least show me his house. I would like you to take me to where you are staying. She regarded me with evident distress and finally, overcome with panic, she nodded silently and collected her coat. We proceeded to my vehicle and I offered to drive her to her destination and then return her to her own car. She seemed surprised but agreed. By that time, the detectives had determined that the matter was of a private nature and that further involvement would be unproductive. They advised me not to take any precipitate action. Marie was silent for the majority of the journey, only offering directions when necessary. At one juncture, she spoke in a barely audible whisper, stating that we might be required to reimburse the police for the time wasted. I was keen to inquire as to the identity of the individual with whom she was conversing, but I restrained myself. I was left to speculate as to the nature of this person and the context of their conversation. I was unable to ascertain the state of my pulse and blood pressure. As we arrived at the townhouse, I was compelled to take a moment to steady my footing. I was under the impression that I would find answers to my questions within the townhouse. Marie proceeded to lead us into the house. As we traversed the living room, I immediately observed my wife's footwear on the floor by the couch. Her preferred scarf was positioned on the chair. I proceeded to traverse the hallway when Marie called out, "James, do not enter that room." This was the precise moment I entered the master bedroom. Marie's attire was in a state of disarray, with personal items strewn across the bed, chair, and dresser. Upon opening the closet, I observed a collection of familiar dresses. One stood out as her preferred choice, yet I was certain it was stored in her home closet. It was evident that the items in question were duplicates, and there were multiple pairs of shoes that appeared to be in her size and the style she favored. These were items that she had not packed for the trip. There was no longer any doubt in my mind, and I came to realize that if I opened a few drawers, I would undoubtedly find her underwear and other personal items. The room seemed to have been designed not for everyday living, but for the occasional sleepover, dinner, dancing, and then intimacy and sleep in the arms of a lover. I returned to the living room feeling defeated, where I found Marie sitting quietly on the edge of a chair, staring aimlessly at the floor. "Is there something you wish to divulge?" Marie merely shook her head slowly. "For how long has this been the case, Marie? This is not a mere platonic relationship." Marie gave a shrug, as if she were unsure of the answer, but it was evident that she was fully aware of the duration of the relationship. "Who is this individual to you?" Marie was silent for a considerable length of time. She responded in a subdued voice, "I had him first. We were together during our high school years." I wondered if she meant high school or college, but both were long enough ago that I decided it didn't matter. "How long have you been seeing him behind my back?" This question prompted a sudden, pronounced movement of her head. However, she was unable to respond. She would have preferred to deny it, to make it seem as though it had never happened. However, we were both aware that it was true. We reconciled approximately 7 years ago. Initially, our interactions were limited to lunches and dinners. One evening, when you were away, we attended a dance. It was a year before we had sexual intercourse. Marie nodded her head slowly, indicating that she had been aware of the sexual relationship between her partner and her friend for 6 years. "How did you manage to maintain this secret? Did you visit her residence, or did he come to yours?" This prompted an immediate response from Marie, who jerked her head upward. "I never brought him to our house. I would never do that to you." I nodded, indicating my understanding. "Angry, so you can sleep with him, but you won't entertain him in our house. I am gratified to hear you draw the line somewhere." She became angry, but was unable to deny anything. The assertion that you would be with me forever was a fabrication derived from the playbook of those who engage in infidelity. I initially considered that there was no point in engaging in further debate, but I subsequently recognized that there was indeed a point. Your professed love for me was diminished by your actions, as you were effectively saving a portion of your affections for another individual. You repeatedly lied to me because of this person, made promises to me that you did not intend to keep, and you relinquished a portion of yourself that you had previously reserved exclusively for me. Do not assert that he did not take anything from me. He did, in fact, take everything, even if you do not believe it. Marie was in a state of distress, and I stood by her side, silently observing. I was aware of all the pertinent details. I considered destroying his belongings, but I restrained myself. Ultimately, I relinquished my efforts. I accompanied Marie back to her lover's bedside. This prompted a fresh outburst of tears, yet I was bereft of solace. I drove her back to the hospital. As she exited the vehicle, she implored me, "James, please. Please allow me some time. He has no one to care for him. I cannot allow him to die alone. I will be home soon, and we can resume our life together. I love you. I swear." I nodded silently and let her go, telling her that he was waiting for her. By that time, she had likely already came to understand that our relationship was irreparably damaged. I drove home at a slow pace for 4 hours, during which I experienced a profound sense of detachment. I was overwhelmed by a profound sense of despair, having endured 2 weeks of intense stress and worry, and having been counseled by friends and family to maintain hope. I was devastated to discover that she had been unfaithful to me the entire time. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I was physically and emotionally exhausted. I only managed to stumble into the house and sink into my favorite chair. It was unclear how much time had passed before the first phone call rang. It was her parents, who wanted to know where I had been and if I had learned anything. This was when I realized I had driven 200 miles. Without divulging any information to anyone, I briefly considered sparing Marie the embarrassment. However, I had spent the last vestiges of my manly love for the woman who had betrayed me over the years, so I informed Henry and Margaret of the situation. They initially struggled to accept the truth until I provided a detailed account of what had transpired. At that juncture, the veracity of my account was inconsequential, my marriage was irreparably compromised. I was acutely aware of this without the need for introspection. It was a reality that had emerged from the depths of my being, shattering my heart and engulfing me in its wake. Our union was at an end. Marie had chosen another man, and I was no longer a viable option. She engaged in deceitful behavior for years, lying to me and acting in secret behind my back while she was involved with another man. This is not a mistake, it is a pattern of betrayal that cannot be undone. I informed her friends of the news, attempting to be as objective as possible while still expressing my feelings. Subsequently, I contacted our children and attempted to relay the news in a tactful yet forthright manner. I informed them that I had discovered their mother in the company of her romantic partner, who was gravely ill in a hospital bed. However, they were reluctant to accept this information. Consequently, I provided them with further details regarding the townhouse. When they inquired about the possibility of forgiveness, I responded by saying, perhaps at some future date, but I am unable to trust her again. I offered my apologies to both children, but informed them that I was divorcing their mother. I then forgot to tell them that they still had no way of contacting her. I asked them not to tell her about it, as I felt that she needed all the time she had left to spend with him and her. The children's residence remained unchanged. They initially resisted my attempts to communicate, but eventually came to understand the situation. 2 weeks later, their father passed away, and Marie returned to the family home. However, I had already departed the area, and a week after her return, she was served with divorce papers. I did not leave town, resign from my job, or attempt to evade her. Instead, I simply relocated to a different apartment. I located a residence that met my needs. I was situated in close proximity to the former residence, allowing the children to visit us both. Marie attempted to influence my decision. I permitted her to do so, and she would visit my office or apartment and implore me to reconsider. However, I had already made up my mind. She wept and threatened, but her actions did not alter the situation. The marriage endured for 6 years, during which time I was subjected to a series of betrayals. If one considers the frequency of lunches, dinners, and social events, it is evident that the infidelity was not the sole factor that led to the dissolution of the marriage. In fact, the extent of the deceit, particularly in regard to the ease with which it was perpetrated, played a significant role in the breakdown of the relationship. Upon discovering the extent of her deceit, I realized that she no longer regarded me with the same level of devotion and trust. The same level of devotion is evident. It has been 2 years since the divorce became final. I do not inquire about her activities, but the children believe their mother simply goes to work and then home. They are unaware that she does not leave the house. I am saddened by her suffering, but I am unable to help her. Even now, 2 years later, I am unsure if it is unclear whether she is grieving the loss of her first love or the marriage she betrayed. I am not doing well myself. I am not yet healed, but the pain is slowly lessening. I do not date, but I have started noticing other women and suspect I will eventually engage in dating. I am far from trusting another woman outside of my marriage. In a professional setting, it is unclear why she chose to betray me, what she lacked that I could not provide, and how she justified her actions. I could inquire about these matters, but I see no point in doing so. After all, it was her decision, and she had reached a point where she was at peace with it. I never revealed this information to anyone. I have doubts as to whether they would believe me even now, but I never learned his name. There was a man lying on his deathbed in a townhouse where my wife played the role of family when they were together. This is sufficient for me. It is not possible to take revenge on the dead, and I came to realize that I was unable to forgive the wife who betrayed me.